G'day Dons fans and welcome back to Don the Stat. After months of pre-season training, match simulations and practice matches, the wait is finally over. Round 1 is here. The Bombers kick off their 2026 campaign against Hawthorn tomorrow night, and as always, there's plenty to talk about. New roles, new combinations, 4 fresh faces, and the first real look at how Essendon want to play this year when points actually count. I'm Jonathan Walsh, and joining me as always is my co-host Ian Hume. Humey, we've spent the entire pre-season analysing training reports, watching practice matches, trying to piece together what this side might look like in 2026. But I guess the theory's stopped now. Round 1 is upon us. How are you feeling on the eve of the season?
Mate, I'm super excited because the internal optimist in me thinks that anything can happen, especially in round 1. And I don't think there's a team that any Bomber fan wants to beat more this year than the Hawks. So I really can't wait to get to the G tomorrow night to see how things play out. And hopefully we are on the right end of it. Those of you watching on YouTube may notice a change of scenery for me. I'm not recording in the garage tonight as my partner is off supporting her Tigers against Redacted. Hopefully the result this time is just as fun as last year's was. How are you doing, mate?
Yeah, well, your partner's opposition has got out to a 3-goal lead early, having kicked the first 3 goals of the game. But it's only nicer when they get out to an early lead and they get run down. So let's hope it plays true to that script again. But yeah, I'm good. Thank you, mate. It's come quick, hasn't it, the off-season? It sort of doesn't feel like all that long ago season 2025 came to an end. There's always a bit of theatre around round 1 as well. Every sort of supporter base talks themselves into what their side might be capable of. And for Essendon, I think there's a real intrigue about what this group can produce and what we're going to get out of the young players that we're bringing into the side. I think we've seen glimpses across pre-season. The ball movement has sort of sped up a little bit, which most Essendon fans have been craving. There's been some positional changes, a few players that, look to have taken a step forward in their development as well. But yeah, I guess round 1's that first proper stress test, isn't it? So yeah, really looking forward to getting to the G tomorrow night.
Yeah, me too. Just want to say before we really get into the show that a big congratulations out to you. As today's the final day of the jumper countdown, being 1 day before tomorrow's match. It's been great reliving Essendon's history these past 57 days, and the response has been fantastic. So well done to you. You obviously put in a mountain of work in getting that up and getting everything online, and I just was sort of along for the ride. So yeah, again, congratulations on that.
No, thank you, mate. It's been a nice way to kick off the days leading into round 1, sort of taking that walk through or down memory lane and just remembering. I think it gets lost sometimes, and at other times probably gets overplayed as well, just the rich history our club really does have. So thanks to everyone who joined in the conversation. It has been lots of fun. If you're interested and you want to read in a little bit further detail or go back over it, each number, so 1 through to 58, is on our website at donthestat.com, so you can go and pick that up and read back through them if you do want to relive it all.
Indeed, you should do that. Also, big thanks to Fred, John Baxter, Alistair Hewitt and Aaron Heath for signing up to the Patreon this week. A reminder to all listeners of the show that the First Thoughts episodes are once again Patreon exclusive for the regular season. This episode for the Hawks game should come out early on Saturday, so do keep an eye out on the Patreon for that. We're also really excited for the pre-game meetups to start again. Both Jono and I will be at Founders Bar inside the MCG above Gate 4 from 5:30 to just before the bounce. All listeners are welcome to join us for a pre-game chat and a drink if that's what you like. It's going to be great to see everyone after the off-season, so do come along if you can.
Yeah, thanks, gents, for jumping on board. Appreciate the support. It's also nice. I assume that's the former Brazilian soccer player Fred who's joined us, so it's nice that we've reached the South American shores too. So it's always flattering to have people continue to join our community and add their own spin and background and information to it. So yeah, welcome, guys. Sort of moving on from there, mate, we've had a late nomination this week for the Damien Barrett Lifetime Achievement Award this week. You sort of had someone else lined up. I won't mention who, but someone who I think will be pretty confident is going to get a nomination several times throughout the year anyway. And yeah, at the 11th hour, you've slotted someone in. Tell us about it.
Well, you mentioned this person, and he's John Ralph. And when I did see a article titled Unpacking the Zach Merritt State of Play with a John Ralph byline, I did think we had our next Damien Barrett Award nomination, but that article from John ended up being a little bit milquetoast. So Ralph does avoid going on the list for now. But we did have a late comer just hours before recording, where Ken Hinkley on SEN stated that Essendon 100% should have taken the draft picks for Merritt in order to facilitate a rebuild. Long-time Don the Stat listeners will know that you especially, Jono, have done a lot of work breaking down what the actual offer from the Hawks was and what it meant in practice for Essendon. I know there's always an assumption that 3 first-round draft picks sounds pretty good, but the actual devil was in the detail with what was offered and what it actually meant. So we're not going to really go into old history here, and I'm going to include a link to an article that you wrote on our website that people can access from the description of this episode that will give people a refresher on our thoughts regarding what Hawthorn offered. But, a pretty poor throwaway statement from Ken that it doesn't seem like he put a whole lot of thought into. I've liked what Ken's brought in the media this year so far, but this was not his best work. So, Ken, you're our 4th Damien Barrett Award nominee of the year.
Yeah, we've covered this before. You mentioned that article. It is on our website, which you'll get in the notes. But yeah, the offer came in late. It offered us picks in a draft that we didn't need and couldn't use. It offered us a player that we weren't interested in, one that couldn't find his way into Hawthorn's team as well. So, given that they critically needed midfielders, I think that says a lot about how they value that player. So, yeah, I think it lacks a bit of critical thinking there from Ken, who, as you said, has been a good addition to footy media so far. So, yeah, I think without the time to move on the picks that Hawthorn offered, we didn't have the ultimately risks that offer being diluted and being stuck with picks that we were going to forfeit on draft night. So, yeah, look, Ken, you're a bit better than that. You're only new to the game, so I expect you'll get better come round 2 and onwards.
Indeed. Although we are playing Port Adelaide that week, so it will be an interesting watch on what he has to say then. Well, look, let's move on to the news. And the news that we're going to cover in this episode actually came from last week, but we held it over because we had so much to cover through the season preview. And it does impact on selection for this week, with Angus Clarke suffering a syndesmosis injury at training and has had to have surgery, ruling him out of the start of the season. Any injury is disappointing, especially for someone who showed so much promise in his AFL games last season. I did feel going into the season he was in a bit of an interesting position, though. If you'd asked people at the end of last season, they would have said he was as close to a lock for a round 1 selection. But he didn't really stand out in any of the preseason commentary from track watchers or in the preseason games. He's also seemed to get moved around a lot in terms of his position, and seemed like there was a bit of confusion amongst the coaches as to where his best position was. And maybe it was just a case of having a look at a young player in different areas of the ground to see what could be gained from that. But I think it did affect his build-up in some way. And then obviously the injury has set him back a little bit further. He is obviously quite fit, having won our time trial. So you imagine that when he gets back, it won't take him long to get back up to AFL pace and up for selection. And so hopefully we can get him back fully fit by mid-season and have him be a contributor in the back half of the year.
Yeah, I think it's always a blow when any player gets injured, let alone someone who's going to miss 6 to 8 weeks. I think he's a player that adds real flexibility to our side. He's someone who, and granted, as you said, he hasn't had the preseason maybe that we'd hoped, but I think also there's probably greater depth of young talent at the moment. So standing out as a young player is a little bit harder than it was a year or two ago. So I think, even if he wasn't in our round 1 team, it's going to delay or slow down his development. I think we saw last year that he could play on a wing and have some real attacking attributes to his game. We saw that in his debut game. We've also seen that he can go back and defend and play a bit taller. So you think about our opponents this week, and Essendon going in with just 2 key defenders. He's the player that could have played that third tall role on someone like a Gunston profile going forward. He's played a little bit at half forward, probably didn't nail that, but it's a tough role to play and he hasn't had a lot of experience in it. We also saw him take some responsibility at stoppages last year for Matt Rowell and Noah Anderson and do a good job there. So I think that flexibility is actually his strength and what makes him an important piece for us going forward. So the other thing that worries me a little bit with Angus is he's spoken a little bit in the off-season that he was feeling a little bit homesick in pre-season too. And I know in the past for players that are injured and not playing footy whilst most of their teammates are, that homesickness can be exacerbated a little bit. So look, hopefully he gets a chance to maybe even get home and spend a little bit of time there and rehab and recover really quickly and is back playing footy sooner than expected.
Yeah, fingers crossed there. In more positive news, we also got word of Lachlan Blakiston signing a 2-year contract extension. He's obviously shown plenty during pre-season training as a ruckman, and I think it's going to be really crucial for the early parts of this season before Nick Bryan comes back from injury. And there's a potential that, as much as we thought Nick Bryan was going to be the number 1 ruckman this year with Draper departing, from what we've seen in the preseason, and the fact that they've signed him up so quickly suggests that they're really liking what he's capable of, particularly with the new ruck rules. Blakiston's ability to leap and the ability to get around the ground as well and get involved in transition, I think it's going to translate really well to the modern game. Again, he's obviously really inexperienced at AFL level, but I'm really excited to see him in round one and how he goes up, particularly as we're going to get to later with the side that the Hawks have selected.
Yeah, a little bit of a surprise to see that this was confirmed ahead of the season. I guess what it does show is that there's a real confidence in what he's producing so far this preseason. Probably wanted to cut off advances from other clubs as well. I expect we probably used it as an opportunity to front end his deal as well and restructure his 2026 payment. Not that that would have been on huge money given that it was his first full year on the contract, but we have a minimum of the TPP, the total player payments, that we have to reach. So potentially we've brought forward some of his 2027 and 2028 contract into this year, which will ultimately free up some space in the years to come where we know we're going to be pretty active in free agency and trade market. So yeah, good for him that it's done now. He gets to go into this round one game knowing that he's not playing for his career, but can now just go about his business, continue to learn and development. Yeah, attack this season with some real confidence.
Indeed. Well, look, we got to sit on the sidelines of opening round and sort of get a taste of what was happening with the AFL and the new rules and how things would go out, particularly in terms of how it would impact the way teams played the game. We also got to see most of the teams that people would expect to be pushing for the premiership in opening round, other than probably Adelaide and Freo. So we've also got a bit of a sense of what the best sides are doing. The scores were high, but that does happen often in the early rounds. So you sort of have to take that with a grain of salt at this stage. I guess from what you saw, Jono, what have you noticed and about how the game might have changed in the off-season, and what does that mean for the Bombers going into 2026?
Yeah, we saw 3 games of high scoring, and then St Kilda, Collingwood sort of went the other way, didn't it? It was low scoring. You probably expect that from those two teams to an extent, certainly from St Kilda, and then I think Collingwood went with a game plan that I think was reflective of how they thought they could beat St Kilda rather than necessarily how we might see them continue throughout the year. But I think what it does show over those 4 games is that there's still room in the game for different methods. It doesn't have to be all-out attack, and you don't necessarily need to go out there and score 120 points in order to win a game. Just some numbers on some sort of shifts or lack thereof. In 2025, average scores from centre bounces were 11.4 points per team per game. That was up slightly to 12.9 in opening round. We're only comparing, was it 4 or 5 games? Sorry, wasn't it? So I've missed one out there. But yeah, those numbers include all 5. So it hasn't shifted all that much. So that talk about the ball up in the centre bounce potentially opening up greater levels of scoring from centre bounce, at least over the first 5 games, hasn't truly played out yet. Ruck contests were down. So that was the theory going into the season, that with the last touch rule in place between the arcs, that there'd be fewer throw-ins and the ball would be alive more. So there was 97.8 ruck contests on average per season. It was 90.8 in the opening round, so down 7 on last season, so just under 2 a quarter. So 7 sounds a lot, but in quarter terms, it's not a huge amount. So I think that last touch rule has probably driven the greatest change so far with teams looking to keep the ball alive between the arcs. But it wasn't necessarily the decrease in stoppages, I think, where we saw the shift. Scores from stoppages around the ground were about the same, 22.9 up from 22.4, despite the decrease in stoppages.
I think that partly could be put down to the fact that because the umpires are throwing the ball up quicker, or the ball's being returned to play through the stoppage quicker, there's not as that much time for congestion to get around the stoppage. And so there's probably more openness in terms of being able to move the ball quickly and get it into a scoring opportunity. I guess probably the other thing that could be resulting in the ruck contest going down is the fact that you've got the throw up at the centre bounce now. Probably that creates less opportunity for those repeat stoppages, because it's easier for a ruckman to find a teammate in open, because you know where the ball's being thrown up to. You sort of can predict that. And so there's a bit more freedom from that centre bounce, which results in less repeat stoppages in that area.
Where there was a big change, what indicates towards being a big change, is there was a 10-point increase in scores from turnover. So centre bounce scores roughly the same, stoppage scores roughly the same, albeit from fewer stoppages. Overall a 10-point increase in scores from turnover, which is a bit of an ominous sign. for us, given our challenges in preventing turnover scores, but also converting turnovers into a score. I think the want to keep the ball alive, that last touch rule in itself, increased the number of turnovers from an average of 63.4 per team per game last season to 71.8 per team in opening rounds. So, yeah, more turnovers, the ball's sort of ping-ponging back a fair bit more. But again, opening round, first rounds in the season tend to see more skill errors as players come up to speed with the game. So I'm not necessarily banking on that becoming a trend just yet.
Yeah, and you talked about the last touch rule there. That would also be contributing to the amount of turnover or the increase in turnovers. Things which in the past would have been a throw-in and not necessarily counted as a turnover would be turnovers in the new paradigm.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So if you've got the ball and you give it to the opposition through a free kick, in this case, kicking it out of bounds, then that's classified as a turnover. So yeah, that I do think the last touch rule is having a bigger impact so far, at least, on the number of turnovers than it is which is then increasing scores from turnover than it is having on driving down stoppages and impacting the scores from stoppages. So that's the biggest shift that I've seen so far, both watching and in the data. In 2025, teams scored from 20.8% of possession chains last season. So as a rule, when a team got the footy, they were a 1 in 5 chance of scoring. That was up slightly in opening round to 21.4. So a little bit of an indicator there that the game was a little bit more open and that teams were able to score a little bit more freely. That's despite the Collingwood and St Kilda game pulling it down. So look, I watch this space at this stage, but yeah, they're the shifts I've seen so far.
Yeah, it's hard to judge from 5 games, as you say, with a lot of teams didn't play, and particularly a few teams that you would expect to be around the bottom of the ladder that could change some of those numbers there. But look, that's enough preamble. Let's turn our attention to our urine and feces coloured opponents in the Hawks. The Hawks, coming off a semi-final appearance in 2024, started the year 4-0 in 2025 before stumbling a little bit, although ultimately they did end up with 15 wins and 8 losses and a percentage of 120. Finals wins away against the Giants and Crows saw them reach a preliminary final where they led by 21 points in the first quarter before being overrun by the Cats.
Yeah, some clues in that match that are worth considering, mate, in regards to our own prospects against the Hawks. Hawthorn had 7 more intercept marks in that game. Part of a feature of their game is their ability to intercept mark. Scores from turnover was only 3 points the difference, and Hawthorn outscored Geelong by 2 points from centre bounces. And 10 points in scores from defensive halves. Disposal or possession chains that started in Hawthorn's defensive half of the ground versus Geelong, they were 10 points better off in converting those into scores. But Geelong were plus 10 in contested possessions, plus 13 in ground balls, and plus 12 in close clearance contested possession, and a massive plus 17 at clearance. And that allowed Geelong to get field position. 56% of the game was played in their forward half. Geelong were plus 16 for inside 50s and outscored Hawthorn by 28 points from stoppages, and then 42 points from forward half chains as well. So their ability to use the contest to win clearance and then use clearance to get field position and then use that field position to get repeat inside 50s to score from both stoppages and forward half turnovers was really what won Geelong that match.
Yeah. Looking again at this Hawks profile, they did sort of maintain a similar scoring profile to what they had in 2025. They averaged a tick under 90 points for and 75.4 points against, which was ranked 7th and 3rd in the competition respectively. And this was built off a similar game style in terms of how they moved the ball from the previous year, with 1.38 kick to handball ratio, slightly lower than their 1.42 in 2024. Whilst their inside 50 differential dropped from 0.6 plus 6.4 to plus 1.5, so they're averaging 5 less inside 50s per game compared to their opponent last year than the year before. Their efficiencies are again similar to the year before. They averaged 50% for scores for and 47 point scores against per inside 50.
Yeah, the scoring method didn't really change year to year either. So 36 points a game from clearance and 49 points a game from turnover in 2025. It was exactly the same. The decimal point changed, but exactly the same as 2024. They did rely a little bit more on scoring from their defensive half in 2025, a 3-point swing on 2024. And they did concede 4 more inside 50s a game in 2025 than they did in 2024, which is really what's sort of driven that slight swing in their scoring from defensive half versus forward half.
Yeah. What did drop away from the Hawks in 2025 was their clearance game. Also, they were ranked 5th and 7th in centre and stoppage clearance in 2024. That did drop to 12th and 15th respectively. Despite that, though, even though they weren't winning as many clearances compared to their opponents, they're still actually fairly effective at scoring from these sources. So they rank 5th for scores from centre clearance, and they were 8th from balls up and 9th from throw-in. So they did better in terms of scoring than their differentials would suggest. But their contested possession game also dropped away, going from 3rd to the 8th best contested possession side, and the 1st to 10th in terms of winning ground ball. So there was a definite shift in their midfield, and I think some of those numbers probably suggest what people are saying about the Hawks in terms of their list makeup and the sort of players that they have is right, in that they do have some issues in the midfield, which they obviously tried and failed to address during last off-season.
Yeah, they weren't quite as effective with the ball. And look, I think that's something that happens when teams get a run on. They took teams by surprise in 2024, didn't they? They lost their first 5 or something like that from memory and then flew home. So, yeah, the teams would have done a lot more planning and better understood the method there. They had the 3rd most turnovers of any team last season, just worse than us in that regard. And that turnovers isn't something that you associate with Hawthorn. It's only a 3 additional turnovers a game. But disposal retention also decreased from 71% to 70%. So, yeah, teams were able to find a way, or at least an improved way, on the previous year of winning the ball back and restricting Hawthorn's ball movement in the same manner that than they did in 2024.
Yeah, indeed. Where the improvement did come from the Hawks in 2025, though, was in their aerial game. The intercept game, which had been strong in 2024, was also strong in 2025, so they ranked 3rd last year for intercept differential. But their marks both around the ground and inside 50 improved substantially. So they went from a negative mark differential in 2024 to +7 in 2025. So that not only showed their ability to retain the ball, but also deny their opposition easy marks, whilst they had an inside 50 mark differential of +4, which was the 2nd best in the comp. So again, it showed how well they were able to find targets inside 50 whilst denying their opponents the same.
Yeah, that meant their ball retention inside 50 improves, despite ball retention going, or disposal retention decreasing overall. When they did go inside 50, they were better at retaining the footy. They retained the footy 47.7% of the time going inside 50 in 2024. It was up to 48.6 in 2025, although it was down to 31.9 against GWS in opening rounds. Hopefully, that's a trend that continues on Friday night.
Yeah. Well, look, turning to what the Hawks did with their list, they made 7 list changes in the 2025 off-season. Luke Bruce retired, having featured in 8 games in 2025. James Worpel departed as a free agent to Geelong after 21 games, whilst Chankong Jaff and Jai Sarong were traded to Melbourne and Sydney respectively. Whilst Jaff played 20 games last year, Sarong didn't feature. 3 others were delisted, including Seamus Mitchell, who played 4 games, and Sam Frost, who played 2. After putting all their eggs in the Zach Merritt basket, the Hawks failed to bring in any players from other clubs through trade or free agency, where their 2 quote-unquote first rounders that the Hawks offered as part of their merit deal. After a few trade backs, the Hawks took midfield forward Cameron Nairn with pick 20 and key forward Aiden Schubert with pick 23. Jack Dalton and Matthew Leray were taken later in that draft, whilst big-bodied midfielder Ollie Greaves was picked up as a rookie, and then former North player Flynn Perez was picked up as an SSP after helping Sturt to a Sandfeld premiership.
Yeah, none of whom are playing this week. Look, games played aside, in some of those cases, at least, Frost 33, Warple 27, Bath 26, Sarong 23. So, Sarong hasn't played a lot of AFL footy, but they're all sort of seasoned, multiple pre-seasons under their belt, depth players who could be relied upon to come in and play a role. They have sacrificed that depth and experience to bring in youth, albeit that wasn't the initial plan, was it? Because they were looking to bring in Zach. So, yeah, the depth profile of their list has certainly changed in the off-season.
Indeed. I guess, after examining the Hawks over looking at their numbers and looking at their list, I think other than the good performances they had in the finals, I think sort of masked that they probably stagnated as a team in 2025. And as you said, they've lost some decent depth from their side in 2026 and didn't bring in anyone you would expect to make an immediate impact this season. They're really reliant on their core group staying fit and getting more development out of their 3rd and 4th year players. They're really going to be interesting to watch to see if they can get that improvement internally when so many of their top 8 rivals have brought in players that can improve them immediately from other clubs.
Yeah, look, I'd be more than satisfied with having an average home and away season and then playing some good footy in finals and getting a finals win or two. But I appreciate this is an Essendon show and not a Hawthorn one, but a quick scan of their fourth-year players. 4 years ago, they drafted Mackenzie and Weddle. Both are players that have, high upside, particularly Weddle. I think, I don't think anyone truly knows what his ceiling is. Hustwaite has only played the 10 games, was put up for trade, and then Jack O'Sullivan has been delisted and Bailey McDonald has only played the 8 games. So they do have 2 high-end talents coming into their 4th year that they would expect that help them move forward. And then if you look at their 3rd-year players, Nick Walton and Cal Shadir were in that group. They're entering their 3rd year. Both, again, have shown what talents they are. They've performed at finals level as well. So, big game players. So I think they'd be pretty happy there. Will McCabe and Bodie Ryan are the other 2 that they drafted in that year who are untried at senior level. So, yeah, I think you're right. For them to move forward and take a step, it's going to need to come from that 3rd and 4th year player group. But yeah, as I said, it's an Essendon show, not a Hawthorn one. So let's get on with it and, cast our mind back. I guess it's been 12 months since we played the Hawks.
Yeah, and obviously heading into another round 1 clash against the Hawks. I think it's, the 4th or 5th year in a row it's been the Hawks in round 1. It's obviously become a tradition there, and it's great to start with a traditional rival, although last year's result certainly wasn't an enjoyable one as a Bombers fan, as Essendon went down 12-13-85 to the Hawks 17-9-111. Essendon kicked the opening goal through Isaac Kako, who did join the Jack Kirby club as a first goal player, before the Hawks piled on 6 goals in a row to get out to a 34-point lead. Whilst Essendon threatened at various stages over the remaining 3 quarters, the Hawks held the Bombers off to run out comfortable 26-point winners in the end.
Yeah, we had a patch in that 3rd quarter where we really dominated the game. We were 30 points down, and then we kicked 1 goal 5 to get back within 20 points. Better conversion there, and who knows what sort of pressure we could have had the Hawks under, but they ultimately kicked the last 2 goals of that 3rd quarter and got the margin back to 32 points. We really did waste our momentum in that game. And look, a bit of a theme of Essendon in the last couple of years has been that when we've had momentum, we haven't capitalised on the scoreboard. But we did keep coming. We pegged it back to 18 points in the last quarter before I think they kicked the last goal of the game. So the effort, we got stung a bit at the start, didn't we? But the effort overall was there. We just had too big a lead to chase. And then when we did have momentum, didn't quite put it on the scoreboard.
Yeah, indeed. It was a game the Bombers dominated at clearance, particularly around the ground, where they were a plus 23 in terms of stoppage clearance, which was an enormous number and not something you generally associated with the Bombers before last year. Stoppage clearance and ground ball gets is something that, despite a pretty poor year overall, was an area you could point to as being an improvement from the Bombers last year. And that plus 23 sort of allowed us to generate an inside 50 advantage of 10. Whilst the pressure was strong in this area with 18 inside 50 tackles, the Bombers couldn't convert. Whilst the Hawks' ability to score from centre clearance, 4 goals won to 2 behinds, probably proved the difference in the end. In terms of individuals, Jai Caldwell led the way for the Bombers with 36 disposals, 11 tackles, 10 clearances, and 11 score involvements. You might want to call that a quadruple double. Whilst Andrew McGrath had 27 and Zach Merritt 26. Al Amon had the most of the Hawks with 28, whilst James Sicily had 24 and 7 intercepts. In terms of the scorers, Dylan Moore and Nick Watson both kicked 3 goals, with Ginnivan, Hardwick and Chol contributing 2, whilst the Bombers had an even spread with Dersma, Langford and Merritt each kicking 2.
You mentioned ground ball gets there, mate. It was something that, we were 9th, I think, in the competition last year at plus 1.6 per game for ground ball gets, although we spoke in our season preview that we didn't generate a lot of ground balls in our games, but at least when they were there, we were winning more of them. Hawthorn were below the AFL average, which of course is 0 for differential, but they were minus 0.2 for ground ball gets. They also copped a hammering in round 1 round 0 against the Giants. The Giants got them by plus 18 in that game. So, it's certainly a part of the game that we would have reviewed going into this week and done our work on, trying to see whether we can get an advantage in that part of the game. But you read back through their best players, Sicily intercepting, Amon giving drive off halfback, small forwards kicking 10 goals between them. They have threats in areas where typically we've given up ascendancy to opposition. So, I think this is a game, and we'll talk about it in detail shortly, where the pattern suggests that we've got areas that would really worry Hawthorn, but they have areas that really, really worry us as well. And it could well come down to whose strength is stronger on the day.
Yeah, indeed. Look, let's turn to selection. And since it's round one for the Bombers, we're going to go through the full lineup. We don't normally go through the full lineup. We just focus on the changes. But as it's round one, let's go through the entire team as named. From the back line, Pryor, McKay, Reid, Roberts, Redmond, McGrath. Across the centre line, Dersma, Caldwell, Fiorini, with Blakiston, Parrish and Merritt as the followers. Durham, Caddy and Perkins, as well as Alashkar, Wright and Langford through the forward line. And then named on the interchange bench are Sharp, May, Condagianis, Johnson and Nguyen, with Farrow, Guelphy and El Hawley as the named emergencies. I don't think there's a whole lot of surprises there from the team that is named, given what we saw through the preseason competition. Players like, we knew early on that Sharp and Alashkar and Condagianis were going to make their debut, as was announced a couple of days ago. I think we saw with the responsibility that players, well, second-year players like Johnson and Nguyen, as well as Blakiston, were given, that they were also going to be featuring in that first game. I think probably the big surprise for me is the selection of Archer May, just because we have gone quite tall in terms of tall forwards there. I kind of treat tall forwards like fast bowlers in cricket. You see teams pick 3 or go for 4 fast bowlers, but the fourth one, it can be a bit superfluous. And I kind of worry that by picking a fourth tall forward, it'll be a similar thing there. Although as we get on with the Hawks team, we'll deal with that. What do you think there, Jono?
Yeah, I sort of share some of your thoughts. I think the first thing that stood out to me is you look at that interchange bench, Sharp, May, Kondo, Johnson and Nguyen, like all players that have been recruited in the last, so all first or second year players. So it's an awfully inexperienced interchange bench, and you combine that with Alashkar, who's on the field or named on the field, granted it could change, and then Blakiston playing his first game in the ruck. It is an awfully inexperienced team. Like you're a little bit surprised with May, I guess the thinking here was the Giants were able to separate their defenders last week, and their taller forwards were able to impact the scoreboard. So I think that's probably part of the thinking. I also think it probably is a risk to run with Blakiston as your solo ruckman first time out, and then hope to rely on him being able to ruck 80 or 85% of the game. So we're probably going to need to use Wright to ruck a little bit more in this match than maybe we would like, than maybe if we rewind last year and it was Goldstein or Draper or Bryan in the ruck. So that might be part of the thinking, and that allows May to play forward and give us that structure ahead of the footy to keep their defenders accountable. We've gone with just the 2 tall defenders, which I think everyone expected. We didn't really have a true third option unless it was Jerine. So, yeah, potential to be stretched there. I guess that the Perkins one, I've been thinking about this during the week a lot, and even reflecting on their game against Hawthorn, Hawthorn's game against the Giants, and who scored in that game. And, Stringer was really, really effective, as were a number of their sort of medium forwards. So I think what Archie does do is he demands attention. You can't take the risk of dropping off him, because he can hurt you on the scoreboard, but can also deliver the ball really effectively to forwards as well. So I assume the thinking with Archie Perkins' inclusion is that he can be a player that can lead up and drag a defender out of space and create space for others. And if he doesn't do that, then we can honour him and play through him, and then he can be creative going inside 50. You're right, only the one small forward is a bit of a risk. I think Durham and Zach Merritt are likely to spend a fair bit of time forward themselves. So I guess Merritt does give us an extra small forward when he's rotating there. So, yeah, I think young team, inexperienced, exciting to see these young guys come in and debut. I think interesting watch on what we do with our wingers. Dersma's name there, but does he play there or forward? Pryor's name back, does he play there or on the wing? So a bit of a watch there. But yeah, all in all, it's exciting to see that these youngsters have been given an opportunity and rewarded for having a really good preseason.
Moving on to the Hawks side, they have made 2 changes from their loss to the Giants. Out goes Harry Morrison and Finn McGuinness, both omitted, and in comes Cam McKenzie and Ned Reeves. And it's the Hawks playing 2 rucks that makes me feel a lot better about playing the 4 tall forwards, as Wright might be needed to ruck more during this game than otherwise. And McGuinness being omitted probably suggests that they're not going to run a tag on Merritt, and they're wanting to go head-to-head with our midfield there. I feel like with the Hawks' midfield issues, they probably think if they run a tagger, then that they're also just diminishing their own ability to be effective there, and they're just going to run the risk of Essendon's midfield getting on top.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Connor Nash has done a little bit of that work in the past. It probably would be a waste, though, for them to use him on Zach, given that, Newcombe is their only other true inside mid in that team. And so Nash is going to have to carry a fair bit of that work. I guess Ward could potentially do a little bit of run with as well. But I think you're right. I think it's likely that they'll look to go head-to-head. The second ruck is interesting. I think they've made a decision that is based on Blakiston's leap and Reeves probably being able to match that more effectively rather than Meek. It'll be interesting to see, though, whether they look to stretch us down back. So we've only gone the two tall defenders. Do they look to throw Meek and or Reeves forward at times to try and really stretch us when they've already got Chol, Lewis and Gunston down there as well? I think in a way that might be a bit of a win for us if they do that, as long as we can get some pressure on the footy. But it is going to ask a lot of, say a Pryor or a Redman or a Kondogiannis to have to play tall on one of those guys. Had a bit of a look at their, granted these two guys have played most of their career just as ruckmen, but Meek has kicked 3 goals in a game once, 2 goals on 3 occasions. Reeves has only kicked 2 goals once in a game. So they haven't proven that they're massive goal threats. Meek a little bit more than Reeves. So I think if one of them goes forward, it's probably more likely to be Meek.
Yeah. Let's look at what the Hawks did last week in opening round. And they did go down to the Giants 14-11-95 to the Giants 19-800. The Hawks travelled to NG Stadium to what people thought was a depleted Giants side and ended up giving 8 goals to 5 in the opening term. And from there, the Giants were really able to keep the Hawks at arm's length, with the margin never getting below 14 points to remain with the match, and the Giants ultimately running out 27-point winners. The Giants' win was driven from the clearance, winning 7 more than the Hawks, including 5 at centre bounce, which translated into 5 more inside 50s. Whilst the Hawks managed 10 more intercepts, the territory advantage gave the Giants the advantage in this game and ultimately helped them win.
Yeah, I think probably have to be careful, don't we, not to overanalyze this loss, even though it was 5 goals. I think the Giants kicked well above their expected score from the shots that they took, whilst the Hawks only sort of hit their expected score. So I do think the game played a lot closer than the scoreboard suggested, but there are a few points that I think we do need to make note of. The Giants scored 61 points from turnover in their forward half, so they were able to get the ball forward through clearance and keep the ball in their forward half and convert those forward half turnovers into scores. Turnover scores were relatively even overall, just 4 points in the Giants' favour. And in fact, Hawthorn had 1 extra scoring shot from that source, but the Giants were able to do it in that forward half and hit the scoreboard. The other thing that was a bit similar in this game to our game against Hawthorn last season and Geelong in the prelim that we spoke about was Hawthorn lost the battle in stoppage scores, in this case by 22 points. The other thing the Giants did was they did take what the Hawks gave them. They didn't give the ball back easily. The Hawks conceded just 78 marks a game last season. The Giants took 91 marks in their game against the Hawks in opening round, and that allowed them to retain the ball 46.6% of the time they went inside 50, taking 13 marks inside their forward 50. Compare that to 2025. Teams retained the ball just 42% of the time going inside 50 against the Hawks, and the Hawks conceded 9 in their defensive 50. So, look, there's been some vision shown this week on various media sort of shows, and also Will Day spoke about it on AFL 360 that they didn't press the ground well enough. They didn't work hard enough defensively. So it concerns me a little bit that they've been called out on that. And yeah, I do think that's the benefit of Hawthorn going into a game, having played a game under their belt. They get to review that and they get to fix some things up versus us who are going in fresh.
Yeah, indeed. And they've got that little bit of battle hardness that practice games really can't provide as well. And we saw last year with the way in which they jumped us, having had a game where we didn't because of the opening round cyclone issue. But yeah, that's a big watch for the coming game. Individually in the Giants game, Newcombe led the way with 25 disposals, 4 clearances and 5 score involvements, whilst James Sicily had 23 and 14 intercept possessions. Jack Gunston picked up in 2026 where he left off last year with 4 goals, whilst Nick Watson kicked 2 amongst 8 score involvements for him. The most of the Hawks, with Ginnivan, Chol and Butler also kicking braces there. So, similar sort of things to what we saw in their game against us last year. Those small forwards really dominating there and kicking multiple goals between them. And Jack Gunston didn't do a whole lot against us that game. We were sort of talking, can he continue his form from last year, given where he is in his career? It seems like he's been able to do that. So again, a real watch on what we do with him coming into this game.
Yeah, it is. I think in that game, he kicked his goals in a bit of a burst. He was sort of quiet for a lot of the game. And then I guess that's the the brilliance of Jack Gunston, though, isn't it? He doesn't waste opportunities when he gets them. So, yeah, he's still going to take some real defending and nous to be able to prevent him from hitting the scoreboard. Just quickly on Newcombe, his 4 clearances was down from 6.2 he averaged last year. So, yeah, already there's a bit of an indicator there that without Day and without any reinforcements in that area, without Warple, that, if you can stop Newcombe or keep him to or below his average, then you do really give yourself a boost in terms of being able to win that midfield battle.
Yeah, indeed. And that sort of takes us on to what we're going to talk about in terms of the upcoming match. And, we've touched on a lot. The Hawks clearly thought they needed more depth in the midfield, which is why they went after Zach. And, small sample size, but against a Giants team without their best clearance midfielder in Tom Green, although they did had a handy in Clayton Oliver, that assumption did seem to stand up. The Giants won the clearances and the centre clearance differential of 5 to the Giants, matched the inside 50 count. So it was a clear aspect of the territory games. On paper, I guess we have a good opportunity to dominate the game in the midfield, much like we did last year. But as I said, we did that last time and weren't able to take advantage of it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Oliver, not only did he play and it was handy, he got 7 coaches' votes for his efforts. He was the second highest rated player on the ground, had 19 contested possessions, which is huge, and 10 clearances. And then Kieran Briggs, their ruckman, had 7 clearances. On top of that, the Giants won first possession at clearance by 7. So that's the team that takes the ball first when following a hit out, and then won a clearance 81.8% of the time that they got first possession. And for context on that, the AFL average in 2025 was a clearance 74.6% of the time that they won first possessions. The Giants were really effective at getting their hands on the footy first at stoppage, and then Hawthorn weren't able to strip the ball off them very often and turn that into a neutral or get the ball back. So it has to be the part of the game we can get the greatest level of ascendancy. John Newcombe was 13th in the AFL for clearances per game last season of all players that played 10 or more games. Warple was 36. He's gone. Nash was 40th. So, they don't have a next one up to really fill that void at the moment. And we're going to need to really spread that load. I think it's a big game for Blakiston coming up against 2 rucks and his first game as an AFL ruckman. I do think Caldwell to Newcombe is the go here. If Jai can be his aggressive best, curtail Newcombe and prevent him from getting his hands on the footy, I also think Jai can hurt Newcombe the other way. I guess the battle of the Jais. But then it frees up Parrish to do what he does best, and then Durham to be that real impact player through the midfield. I'm also curious to see what impact Sharp can have as well. I think it's a good opportunity for him to have a bit of a say in and around clearance. But yeah, if we can get this part of the game right, curtail Newcombe to a below average game or even just an average performance, then yeah, I think our ability to get midfield or territory through midfield dominance is there for us.
Yeah, indeed. And you bring up Dyson Sharp on debut there. And, in terms of the name team, you've got Parrish, Merritt, Durham and Caldwell as sort of your first 4 midfielders, but you obviously need more rotating through there. We've seen Roberts go through there at times, and you would expect him to play some role there, but they've probably picked Sharp to be that 5th or 6th midfielder there. So on debut, that's going to be a big challenge for him, that when he does go into the midfield there, that on debut, he's able to, at the very least, nullify his opponent there. It's a big challenge for him coming into his first game, where he's probably going to have to play a bigger role than a lot of debutants have to.
Yeah, I think that's right, mate. Curious to see how Hawthorn lines up with their midfield. Given the talk has been that McKenzie is likely to play more as a forward. Sorry, McDonald is likely to play more as a forward. So McKenzie comes into that midfield mix. He was unavailable last week. They ran predominantly with Newcombe 89% of centre bounce attendances last week, Nash 58, Ward 56, and then McDonald 33. Dylan Moore went in for a little bit as well, as did Weddle, Watson and Butler. So they did rotate their half forwards through there. McKenzie comes in and probably reduces the need for their forwards to come in. I think Roberts has a role in the midfield to give us run through that. We sort of stealing the thunder a little bit of what we're about to talk about, but a team that does lack a little bit of speed. I think Archie Roberts isn't necessarily breakneck speed, but he gives us run and carry through the midfield and can combine really well with Parrish and Durham. So I'm keen to see him through there. My early thoughts, and we spoke about this when we put together our initial team for round 1, were to fight fire with fire on the outside. But I think we need to balance it out a little bit. And keeping the game a contested one, at least in theory, is harder to achieve in 2026. And I'm not sure it suits our ruckman nearly as much as it suits theirs. I think, Lachlan Blakiston's not a body on body, get the ball to ground, tackle, throw his weight around type of ruckman. He's a jump over the opposition ruckman, get the ball out into space, and then run and follow up type. So I'm not sure he has it in his game to turn it into a pure scrap in and around the contest until we can win secure ball out. So I think pressure will help, but I also think ball control goes a long way in this game, and we just can't afford to needlessly give the ball back. I think we all want faster ball movement when we can get it. We want to attack the corridor when we can, but I also don't think this is a game where we want to just be kamikaze and reckless in doing so. I think talked about it already. The media have made a real focus of it. Will Day mentioned it, that the Hawks just gave the Giants way too much leg rope last week and didn't press the ground hard enough. So I think we can expect the Hawks to raise the bar on last week, but I do think we just need to be calm with the footy. Faster ball movement needs to come, I think, from ball movement up the ground. So faster ball movement through presenting more options and more movement from our mids and half forwards in transition, rather than just the person with the footy playing on at all costs and trying to run and carry when options aren't there. So I think we need some calm heads, not just kamikaze ball movement.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And, you touched on it earlier. I think the margin in the game that the Hawks played against the Giants wasn't necessarily reflective of the overall game. You touched on the X score there. I think what set out that game apart from a lot of the other games in opening round is, as much as most of opening round was a lot more free-flowing, that game was more free-flowing than most. It had the total, or the lowest total amount of tackles within the game of any game in that opening round. So there was a lot of space for both sides to move the ball and be free. I feel that if we give the Hawks as much space and time as the Giants did, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. And the Giants are sort of set up to defend a ball movement across the ground. They do like to win the ball back from their back half and then counterpunch. It's not something we're really well equipped to do as the Giants have. We don't have that ball movement ability. The suggestion of some rain around that seems to have dissipated. But I think as much as possible, we want to try and make it more of a scrap than the Hawks played in the last game. And as you said, the Hawks are probably going to come in looking to do the same, given what they're responding to from the previous week.
Yeah, I think that's right. My concern is if we rely on a scrap and a scrap only, that in the moments where it's not, because doing that for a full game is a real challenge. We're not as experienced and rigid in that as, say, St Kilda and what they've been able to do against Collingwood, and ultimately they lost that game as well. Doing that against Hawthorn is a real challenge. So I think there are going to be times where we do need to defend with the ball in hand, like Collingwood did to St Kilda. And if Hawthorn give us space to move into and they don't press up, then we don't necessarily have to always run at them. What I'd rather see us do is get options coming up at the ball carrier and honouring those, rather than trying to just take space by run and carry for the sake of run and carry.
Yeah. Moving to the Hawks back line, James Sicily was a big driver of the Hawks in the back half last game for them. He won 14 intercept possessions against the Giants. We've had success in the past playing a defensive forward on him to limit his impact. We haven't really selected anyone that screams defensive forward. I know you're not the biggest fan of this sort of selection generally, but do you think it's something that would have been worth it for this game? Or is there someone that potentially we could put on him to stop his influence and potentially give us an easier time of winning the game?
Yeah, I spoke a little bit already about the need to come up at the kicker and try and drag Hawthorn defenders out of position and use sort of calm and controlled ball movement to do that. And I keep thinking back to the game in 2024. So we ran the tag on Sicily last year. Guelphy did a pretty good job at keeping him quiet, but it didn't really help us win the game because they've got reinforcements down there now. They've got Barras, they've got Battle, they've got Scrimshaw, who can all intercept mark, and their smalls do it as well. So, yeah, I think they have too many intercept weapons to think that just locking down on one is job done. The other thing that it does is it moves a player, a forward, out of your defensive zone by virtue of them just being Sicily or someone else conscious, and that aids ball movement. So in that game in 2024, we played through Sicily's opponent. He will still be one that looks to drop off. He likes to be a spare and get around and help his other opponents, but even Battle and Scrimshaw will try and play front shoulder at times as well. So I think what we want to do is when Sicily or one of their other defenders drop off, we want to see if his opponent can get on the lead 50 to 70 metres from goal. And in that game in 2024, it was Perkins a fair bit, particularly early, and then they moved Sicily around. He got Jones, and then Jones got dangerous in that part of the ground. Then later on, it was Caldwell. And what that does is it just shifts their defensive structure and helps us to get deeper entries. And as we know, we've spoken about it a lot, deeper entries are a lot easier to defend than shallow ones, because we can push up and make the ground small on them and force them to kick out into contests. So, yeah, I think for me, rather than playing man on man, let's identify the one that Hawthorn are trying to free up and play through them with some real control ball movement. And then when we do need to go deep, or when we do need to kick to a contest inside 50, we make sure we're doing it deep.
Yeah. I guess at the other end, we touched on Gunston with the Giants game, and given our selected side, it's probably a big job for Redmond this week just to sort of play as a taller defender, although I think you've said repeatedly that you like it when Mason is forced to play tall. You think it brings the best out of him. So hopefully that's the case this week against Gunston. But it's probably the fleet of smalls that the Hawks have that is probably the most concerning aspect of their forward line. For me, we know the quality of both Watson and Ginnivan, whilst the addition of Butler certainly gives them a lot of scoring power through that area, and Dylan Moore as well. Look, I guess we've gone with Newen. We touched on him a bit earlier. So we've got that smaller defender there as well as Andy McGrath and sort of Pryor, and even Johnson can sort of play as that smaller defender. I guess where is the keys there for you in terms of our defensive matchups?
Yeah, well, I think that the matchups are going to rotate a lot, because Hawthorn, like they did last week, are going to rotate their forwards. Probably not to the level as they did last week through the midfield and the wings, but I think they're still going to need to do a level of it. So I think similar comments here on our back six as I shared with their back six. Their forward six are all genuine goal threats. So I think supply is what we need to do here. If we can win contests, we get field position, we play through their intercepting defender's opponent and use that to get deep entries, then we're better placed to press up, defend the ground, and take pressure off our own back six, which sounds sort of simple in theory, I guess, but they're a really good team. They've had a relatively stable list that has been building for a number of years now. So, and they have that first game under their belt. We're a team with 3 debutants. I think we've got 7 players under 20 years of age or younger, and a ruckman playing his first senior game as a full-time ruck. So I think we're going to need to settle fast, start well, and then obviously maintain it. That's a really big ask, but I do think there's a method there, and that method comes with winning the ball at the contest, using that to get territory, and then where we can deep inside 50, or if we can't find a target inside 50, then make sure we're going deep to a contest and we lock it in, or at least slow their exits as frequently as possible. So yeah, we have strengths in their areas of weakness, but like I said earlier, they have abundance of strengths in areas that we struggle, and stopping small forwards has been one of those typically over the last few years.
Yeah, indeed. And I think the other thing you probably want to touch on when it comes to the Hawks is their running power from the back half, and players like Amon and Impey are the sort of players that have really torn us apart in the past. So I sort of think a lot of what you've touched on there about getting the ball deep into the forward 50 and trying to defend from there is probably actually the key to defending those sort of players, as opposed to one-on-one matchups. You sort of want them getting their disposals in sort of deep inside defensive 50 and having to move the ball from there rather than further up the ground. I sort of think about how we've had to deal with Jack Sinclair for the Saints in the past, and the games we've done well against the Saints. You look at Jack Sinclair's heat map, and it's congregated around the Saints back 50, whereas in games we've struggled against the Saints, he's sort of been up around the wing sort of area. So I think if we can get heat maps for Amon and Impey in terms of where they're touching the ball as being more in our forward 50, I think that'll go a long way to curtailing their influence there.
Yeah, I think the forward line lacks some balance, doesn't it, in terms of small forwards. We've decided to leave Guelphy and Gresham out of this game, which is probably a bit of a sign of where our coaches are heading and the direction we're going in. We've backed in a first gamer who was pick 53 in the draft to players that the sole true small forward, and left the experience of Gresham and Guelphy out of a team that is really lacking for experience. So I think what our forward line is starting to add, though, is goal threat. So what it lacks in balance, there's goal threats there now. So Caddy, Wright and Langford, we know, are all capable of hitting the scoreboard and contributing strongly to score. We don't quite know what else Alaska is going to bring at AFL level, but we've seen at underage level in practice matches and whatnot that he can be really creative and kick goals from a low number of disposals. So he's not someone that opposition defenders are going to want to drop off, particularly at forward stoppages or defensive stoppages in their case. And then we know what Archie Perkins can do if he's afforded time and space. And then I expect we'll see a combination of Merritt, Durham and Dersma playing through half forward as well. And all of those can hit the scoreboard as well. So we are starting to bring a mix of forwards who are capable of scoring multiple goals in a game, which is important. And what that does mean is that we're going to put some pressure on defenders this year to be able to, or to have to honour their direct opponent. I think what we don't know though, and we're going to need to see is those forwards bring defensive attributes. And I don't know that we have a lot of natural instinct in and amongst that. Even Alaska and Nate Caddy, it's not instinctive for them, and they're going to need to turn that. It's not instinctive for Kyle Langford either. It's not for Archie Perkins. And look, there's not too many 200-centimetre key forwards who show too many defensive attributes either. So we do lack those genuine, without Kako there, who added it to his game. He wasn't drafted with it. So I think it's actually going to be a big one for the likes of Durham, Merritt, Dersma, because we know they have it in their game to do it when they're rotating forward. They're the ones that are going to have to lead by example, I think, and we hope that then two or three others bring that along with them. Just coming back to that goal threat, where that can be important is creating separation. So taking their defenders apart, leading out on them on different angles, also means that when we give the ball back, it's harder for them to link up and rebound as well. So yeah, I think our best chance is it comes back to what we said right at the start. Win the midfield clearance, be methodical when we go inside 50, look for those, lower our eyes, look for those hit-up options, separate their defence, and then if we have to go long, we do it deep so that we can lock the ball in or at least press up and make their exit slow.
Indeed. Well, look, let's wrap up the episode with our final thoughts. And there's been one topic on everyone's lips for months now, given what happened in the off-season and everyone knowing that this was going to be the round one clash. So, Jono, how much will the Zach Merritt off-season drama factor into how this match plays out?
To be honest with you, mate, I hope it factors a lot. I'm not sure it will, but look, we spoke about how important it is to start well. If the Hawks target Zach, and I don't know if they will, I don't know if they care. I mean, they do have some players who like to sort of show some attitude, Watson and Jack Ginnivan and these types. So maybe it'll factor a little bit for them. But if they do target him a bit and we can just make the ball our focus, I think it'll give us an early advantage and we're going to need it. I don't think Zach needs much motivation to play well. I think he does that every week anyway. So look, I think in all likelihood, it's probably a bigger talking point for certainly the media and then also fans than it is for the playing group.
Well, fingers crossed that the match is won with a Zach Merritt goal after the siren, and then he runs around tugging his Essendon jumper and giving it to the Hawks fans. I think that would be a great way to get a result this week. But look, that will do us for this evening. The pre-season's been a lot of fun here at Don the Sap, but I'm super excited to get into the real stuff. Jono, thanks again for all the work you've done, both for this episode and for the countdown to the season. It's been a mighty effort and the response has been fantastic. So once again, thank you. We'll be back on Saturday with our first thoughts on Patreon before the main episode comes out next Thursday night for our clash against Port. Any final words from you, Jono?
Thank you, mate. It's been nice to have a bit of a pre-season. Once we're out of the headlines, hasn't it? The media's tried really hard to drag us back in with the Merritt situation and then bringing up stuff that happened well over a decade ago. But for the most part, we've just got to work. We've invested in development and sports science resources, strength and conditioning resources. So, I think over recent times, we've seen a pretty seamless announcement of a new CEO, a new vice president. The president's really stepping up and doing a great job. We've added coaching resource. Dean Solomon's back in the ranks as well, which is exciting. I think we've announced 3 or 4 sponsors over the last little while. So corporate partners are certainly seeing the trajectory that we're working in. I think everyone's been really excited about the players that we've added through the draft as well. So let's hope all of those things over this preseason add up to little bits here and there so that when the ball is thrown up tomorrow night, we've got a team that's ready and hungry and eager to go. And mate, I just want to give a quick shout out to my dad as well, who's in respite at the moment, get yourself fit and firing and back to the footy soon. It's a shame that we won't be going to round 1 together tomorrow, but hopefully by sort of round 3 or 4, we're back at the footy together. And yeah, looking forward to getting to the G tomorrow night nonetheless and seeing some friendly faces.
All the best to your dad, mate. I'm sure all listeners will be wishing him a swift recovery so he can get back to see his beloved Bombers. See you all at the G this Friday. And as always, stay safe and go Dons.